Hello and welcome to all our viewers and readers of The Hindu. And I understand many of you are joining us not just from India, but from other parts of the world as well, as we discuss what's happened in Venezuela over the last few days. Certainly a moment of surprise there over the weekend as news came in, first put out there by US President Donald Trump himself, saying that Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro had been captured along with his wife and was being flown back to the US. Of course, Mr. Maduro has since deposed in court, pled not guilty to the charges of narco terrorism there in New York, and said, I was kidnapped. While there's been an outcry around the world, many of the US allies have come together and, if not supported, but at least not opposed the US action. But the louder voice that we're hearing from the global south has been one of outrage over the violation of international law, the kidnapping or abduction of a leader of a country. As well as the summary process that was followed. After all, the US forces went into Caracas, bombed several sites, including military bases there, without any kind of clearance from the UN Security Council, without any clearance even from the US Congress. This is now leading to larger questions, really, about where this all will lead. Whether there are going to be more such operations by the U.S., as Mr. Trump has named other countries, spoken about Colombia, spoken about Cuba, more recently hearing from Trump officials talking about Greenland in the same sense, to say we will not allow, this is our hemisphere, this is the US's hemisphere. So with me to discuss and really unpack all the issues that have come out of there are our experts, and I'm going to introduce them to you. But I do want to tell you, please do get on to X or YouTube or the Hindu's own site and put your questions out there, because we are going to put those to our experts today. Joining us now from the beautiful city of Córdoba in Argentina is Paola Andrea Baroni. She's a doctor of international relations and researcher and professor at the Universidad Siglo 21, and joins us today there from Argentina. Also joining us, Dr. Aparaajita Pandey, assistant professor of Amity Institute of Defense and Strategic Studies. And of course, Dr. Pandey has worked in a number of capacities, but her area of expertise is Latin American countries and Latin American geopolitics. And joining us is a familiar face, Kallol Bhattacherjee, our diplomatic correspondent at The Hindu, and of course, a prolific author as well. So thank you so much for speaking to all of us. And I'm going to come to all of you with a single question, really. And maybe, Paola, you could start. Did the US action, startling as it was, actually come as a surprise?
I think at the beginning it did, but actually seeing all the previous actions of the government in the United States in the Caribbean, some say, well, it shouldn't have been. The thing is, Latin America, and especially South America, is considered a peace area, a peace zone. We don't have had wars more than a century. So this action, similar to what happened in Panama in 1989, brings us a lot of other memories. So I think it was, in a way, a surprise, but on the other, he was warning us that he was going to do something about that, okay? So now the question of what happened is, well, he's able to do it again if he thinks that is needed for the United States' interests.
Okay, so we shouldn't have been surprised even if we were. Dr. Pandey, do you want to come in on that? Do you think that actually...
I feel, so thank you for the question. I feel the fact that US did intervene in Latin America did not come, or Venezuela particularly, did not come as a surprise to me, because he has been hinting at it earlier in 2025. He said that we are going to see a larger military footprint in Mexico or in Latin America as a whole. And Venezuela was always on the American radar. What did come as a surprise to me was just the way Nicolas Maduro was captured, and the fact that his wife was taken as well, and how quickly they have been transported, and now he's already appeared in court. So that part of it all was a bit surprising, but the fact that that US intervened, and if you look at it from the perspective of from the backdrop of Trump sort of losing approval ratings in domestic arena, and the fissure of the MAGA voting crowd, the intervention wasn't a surprise, but the capture definitely was.
All right, that is interesting. Kallol, and I do want to come to the parallel of Noriega as well, but Kallol, given that the Ministry of External Affairs did not respond immediately, their first response was in fact to issue a travel advisory, which one would say is standard, telling Indian citizens, please get in touch with the Indian embassy if you're in Venezuela, and if you're not, please don't travel to Venezuela. It took another day before an actual response came, and we can talk about it. It was a muted response. But was there surprise in Delhi?
Well, I think institutionally speaking, there was an element of surprise as the statement itself revealed. But, if we really look at the experts and commentators in Delhi, many of them have been hinting at that Donald Trump has been trying to reorient the machine of strategic, issues of the United States away from the European continent closer home. So this sort of building up was happening for quite some time, and it was being felt that Trump wants to send a message to Europe that, look, I don't want to get involved in your affairs anymore because I have got more pressing issues closer home. And what Marco Rubio has said so soon after they abducted Nicolas Maduro was quite obvious that this is the era of Monroe Doctrine Part 2. So I think the wider message that New Delhi might have got, even we remember what Mr. Jaishankar said when Ukraine erupted, that it is a war in Europe. So this is an intervention far from home in the Latin American region. So it is for them to deal with. So I think that's sort of it's not a approximate crisis for India, so to say, but it is nevertheless a crisis that India will watch. But I do feel that many of us here were anticipating something like this because the Trump war machine was trying to reorient itself and refocus on certain new areas closer home. And Venezuela is not the first one because we're already seeing the list of the 5 other countries that Trump wants to focus at. So these are, Trump's areas of priorities.
Certainly, and India will watch that closely. I want to do a little bit of the history of this. I'll explain to us really what is behind the very tense relations between Venezuela and the US. This is not just about Mr. Trump and Mr. Maduro, but goes some decades back.
Yes, it did start with Chavez, especially, but not when he was elected, because he traveled to the United States. But when he didn't receive the support of the United States, it's there when he changed his politics. Even though that, that the oil of Venezuela, the crude oil is not good. So Venezuela has been using the United States refineries for many, many decades. It's not new, okay? We know that Chevron is still working in Venezuela. So I think the dialogue of the expression against Venezuela in this second term, especially of Trump, has a lot to do also with as Aparaajita mentioned, the internal elections, the internal problems. He has radicalized his position towards immigrants, etc. Plus Marco Rubio. We don't have to forget him, okay? He put the agenda on Trump's agenda, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, etc. Put it back again, okay? If we can see, Rubio was not in the case of seen in the case of Ukraine. He was not seen in the case of Palestine and Israel. He's seen here. So I think it's kind of like a personal agenda of Rubio as a Cuban American and in that area. And I think that is what it changed this time. And he, on this position of trying to radicalize against migrants and accusing them about the drug dealing, and that the problems of the United States are because of these illegal migrants. And I think that is what changed from the previous administrations of Trump. And in that sense is the change that I observed, and that's what that led to this situation in today. Of course, the speech against trying to invade Panama, and I think China has a way to doing this, because it's a way of also telling China, this is my backyard. Have you seen the post in Instagram of the Department of State saying this is our hemisphere? So I think that says everything about that.
I think that's interesting. In fact, we're getting questions in from our viewers just about that, asking that question. China has built hardware, economy, and tech power in South America. In fact, China is a big trading partner for CELAC, but it lacks software, as in its ability amongst the people to defend its interests. Is there a substance to this argument? This question is being asked by Prem. Paola?
Yes, I don't think it lacks software and not at least in the people. Even though there is a speech, a rhetoric that China is bad, coming from sometimes from the press, that is actually taking or exploding a lot of our natural resources without taking into consideration the environment. There has been issues about that. I think it's more the rhetoric of the United States and Europe towards Latin America than from the Latin American people, how they see China. China is an opportunity. China doesn't spread direct ideology. It doesn't providing an alternative model to the international system, not an alternative political model to the Latin American countries. But it provides to the Latin American countries a lot of resources, economic, financial, trade resources that these countries need, that neither the United States nor Europe has come to help the Latin American countries or impose certain conditions. So I think it's also, this speech comes from Obama. It's not new, okay? Of course, during Trump's both administration, this speech has taken a new level. And in this second one, a worse one, we can say about that, the confrontation. So it's clear that it has to do with that. There has been a huge pressure on the Argentinian government to cut all the links with China. Okay, so it has to do with also that. And Venezuela was the first full step where China is completely in all the aspects. And so I think it has to do with that.
We've seen that tussle play out between the US and China on trade with Argentina, or whether it was the purchase of soy, for example, China buying from Argentina rather than the US. All of these have been playing in the background. Aparaajita, obviously China is just one of the motivations, if you like, for this particular Operation Maduro that we've seen the US carry out. Obviously, everyone's speaking about oil, but what do you think were really the motivations for an operation like this?
So I have China, of course, was one of them, like you said. Oil is big because it's not just the oil. If we look at it, all of Latin America is quite rich with resources. So if we start with Venezuela, which has the dense Mayan crude, and it requires a much more technical know-how to actually drill and harvest that crude. But then right next to it is Guyana and Suriname that have found incredible amounts of oil, and that is light sweet crude, which is much easier to refine, and they've already privatized those sectors. The moment you go a little bit towards the south to Bolivia, is home to the largest natural gas resource in the world. So again, very important. And now we have the lithium triangle with Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, even though there are feasibility studies going on. So there is a resource question. There is, of course, the China argument. Venezuela has and US have never seen eye to eye on almost anything. There has always been some amount of contention between them, whether it is about politics, whether it is about ideology. And of course, the US has wanted Venezuela to privatize its oil for the longest time. I think we also need to go back to the US and look at its domestic domestic political situation. There has been a sort of trend with American presidents to leave a lineage, a legacy. And now, when we talk about what has just happened with this current year, I mean, Trump also talked about the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. That is also the fact that he's not going to be a president for a third term. That is also the kind of legacy he leaves behind. That he was the strong man of USA who went and kidnapped or captured the Venezuelan president. So that is, of course, there. And I feel like they have dug up the whole American backyard thing and clung to it. So there is a multiplicity of factors here. And I feel like Venezuela is just the first step to what they want to do in Latin America. Whether they will succeed or whether it's going to be all this sort of aggressive, I'm not sure about that. Probably they'll take a step back and look at it and try more peaceful avenues to have more influence in Latin America, and probably take that step. The other thing when it comes to China is that China has succeeded in doing something that America and Europe could not, which is build dependencies in Latin America. They've been building these commodity boom cycles with every country, with Brazil, with Argentina, for so long. And China comes with deep pockets and almost no compliance requirements. I mean, if you go for an IMF loan, you lose in virtually all sovereignty. These are austerity measures that leave you politically bereft, like you are never coming back and being a politician again. But with China, that there's no problem like that. They don't care if you have a democracy. They don't care if you are going to put up austerity measures, and they're very willing to freely provide money. And I do think that Paola there said that I think that when we talk about China and it being perceived as a predator, that is more of a narrative and probably was true some 7-8 years ago. But now looking at China and how they've made these huge economic and then political inroads into Latin America, most Latin Americans don't feel like that anymore. I think it comes up from time to time, but nobody is refusing the Chinese money. So,
right. And certainly China will try to portray itself as the counter to this, what you call Monroe Doctrine. The Trump corollary is already being called the Don Roe doctrine, if you like. Kallol, so Paola and Aparaajita have built part of this picture when it comes to Trump's motivations, apart from the obvious, there is also the question of where the global south is. Venezuela famously hosted the NAM summit in 2016, the non-alignment movement. India had sent the vice president over there. But now it seems as if the global south has made a lot of noises, but not really, shown that it really can't do too much. It can't come together in support of Venezuela in any meaningful way. This question also from Prem, which says global south and Indian leadership, can we say it is as good as dead by assessing these responses?
Yeah, so I think the issue with the global south is that it's a very nice term, but it does not represent the political will of the global south. There is we haven't seen a movement within the societies of the global south, or even the societies of the global south have not been demanding that there should be some sort of a solidarity movement in the way that there was during the late 1980s, say, for the developing world to unite in terms of growth and possibility. So I think this particular moment exposes a very important shortcoming of the global south. The whole jargon of global south is more or less exposed for the deficiencies of political will, because this sort of a movement, we talked about non-alignment. Non-alignment was actually catapulted by enormous political will that emerged out of decolonization. The entire movement was very substantial. It was not just rhetoric, and it was not just summits and meetings, capital hopping. But that involved real, substantial handover of power from colonial entities to developing countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and of course also in Southeast Asia, which had one of the most difficult phases of decolonization. What we are seeing in Global South is that the Global South exists, it's recognized, but then it doesn't have that sort of leadership like it used to have earlier, say a few decades ago, which can represent the political will for global. So I think that is what is really in front of us as India's quote unquote silence is becoming very loud for all of us.
And certainly, and India will host the BRICS summit in
True.
2026. So the question, firstly, what happens now? Because as Aparaajita said, this could be just the first step to what Trump wants to do across South America, where they have seen many governments come up which are unfriendly to the US. You know, after a wave, the waves after what we call the banana republic interventions. We saw many of these, sort of very independent governments coming up and left-wing governments in many places. So this could be part of a larger theme of U.S. actions. We have another question which really asks, what happens next? And so I do want to get to that now. We've seen the operations as they played out, Mr. Maduro and his wife being taken away, blindfolded, taken to New York. But what was really interesting, in a sense, is that we did not see a complete regime change. The US did not take out the military establishment, which has really been the backbone for Chavez and for Maduro. The US has, in fact, worked with the vice president. The executive vice president has now been sworn in as the president, Delcy Rodriguez, which is very interesting because they didn't choose Ms. Maria Machado, who's an opposition leader who won the Nobel Peace Prize. They didn't look for the opposition leader, Edmundo, who had won, according to them, the last election and had been recognized as the winner by most of them. Instead, they have also chosen to work with Delcy Rodriguez. So this question has come from Anup Singh, who says, what will be the role of the now President Delcy Rodriguez? And is she a proxy of Mr. Trump? Aparaajita, do you want to have a stab at it first, or Paola?
If Paola is okay, I'd go first. So Delcy Rodriguez is not just, I mean, it plays out like she's a very interesting character right now because she's a hardcore Chavista and has been loyal to Chavez and then Maduro. And Delcy and her brother together virtually run the entire Maduro regime. And then what we got to know that when she had talked to the Trump regime, she said, oh, she's going to be cooperative, and went back and told her people that we must not succumb to the American imperialism. So these are two diametrically opposite rhetorics that she's chosen to delve into. Now, she has been to India earlier, and she's I think quite enchanted by the Indian spiritualism, etc. However, at the moment, like you said, that there is no regime change or an attempt at a complete regime change by Trump. It feels like this was just a shock and awe tactic where they just went in, captured the president and his wife, and then left it as it is. Because it is not just Maduro, not just Delcy who's not being touched, but also Edmundo, like you said, and Cabello, who's literally the military kingpin there. He has also been left on the streets, and most people would say that if you were that worried about human rights abuses, it's Cabello that you should have captured and not Maduro in the first place. So the fact that all three of them are still there, Edmundo has no American support. Machado, I feel, has no American support because Trump was very quick to realize that she is not the kind of person who could rally the Venezuelans behind her. So they are not providing any support to anybody or projecting anybody as the next future Venezuelan president. I am not even sure if the US knows what they want in Venezuela in the long term. I feel like they went in there, they distracted from their domestic politics. They will probably look at one or the other oil well that they can capture. and then just leave, because I don't think that Trump wants to put more more American soldiers on Latin American ground. That is not something that MAGA crowd voted for. So I don't see an American soldier or in Venezuela anytime soon.
Interesting you should say so, because somebody did write it just now to ask, is domestic politics in the US also shaping the conflict? But it's shaping how far that the Trump administration will be willing to go. What's also interesting is none of our panelists today have even spoken about the drugs factor. The excuse given, if you like, by the Trump administration, the charges against Mr. Maduro are all about narco-terrorism. But as I have pointed out, in fact, the drugs are coming in much more from Mexico. There isn't
Colombia.
that much. Colombia, and also fentanyl processed in China, but not so much from Venezuela. I'm getting so many questions that I do want to, take them to all of you. Paola, a question here from Abhijit. We see history repeating itself. Specifically, how U.S. played Iran, and you had pointed out to the previous, 1989, and what we saw with Noriega, what we've seen with Iraq. Could it be the same gameplay that we can expect in Venezuela? In other words, is the U.S. now looking to destabilize the regimes entirely?
In a way, I think it is, but it's also to strengthen its hegemonic power that is actually weakened. So where we can go to do that? Latin America, our backyard. It's easy, it's fast, it's close, and we know that we are not going to lose soldiers or a lot of money in that sense. I think one has to do that, and I go back to, this is our hemisphere, so we are going to tell what to do here. We don't want foreign countries or powers, Russia, Iran, or China, to be there and to make it powerful, because all the actions that Trump has done also has weakened their economy and their trade policies, where United States in Latin America was the first or the second or the third trade partner, now is the fourth or fifth. Okay, so I think it has to do with that situation, and I think the idea of what is next or how this is going to happen, I don't think it's going to repeat soon what was happening in Iraq or Afghanistan. On the contrary, I think they have learned that lesson, and that's why they didn't make a more wide military intervention. They know that the Congress is not going to approve this, and they know that the public won't support that. If you kind of follow what is the media saying in the United States, what are the senators and representatives of the Republican Party, you are going to see that they are against what has been done. So I think probably they are going to try some of these actions where they can find national interest very clear. I don't think it's going to be Cuba. Probably the next one would be Colombia, more closer than Cuba itself, because they cannot
Colombia
get
does have an election coming up. There's already been the spat between Petro Gustav and President Trump as well. Here's another question now coming in. Is this about petrodollars? Kallol, do you want to take that?
Well, I think this is much more than petrodollars. This is, you mentioned the issue of narcotics. The issue of narcotics has been parallel to American foreign policy for at least for the last 50 years or so, because, starting with Vietnam, what we are witnessing is not just the use of petrodollars, but also the opening up in terms of international law, the area of narcotics, because the United States is now opening up an area of which it is quite efficient in handling. But the other powers are not as good as handling when it comes to the world of narcos. In terms of drugs and narcos, what we know is that someone's drugs are someone else's medicines. Just like, someone's freedom fighter is someone else's terrorist. So the world of drugs is a very interesting and a very complicated arena when it comes to the modern states, because modern states have not really understood how to handle the parallel world of drugs. We have so many exciting Netflix series that we watch about Latin America and narcotics, but it really we are yet to understand how to govern that world of narcotics. I think what United States is doing is that it is getting into an arena where perhaps it is confident of handling that world in some ways, and I'm not sure if others can compete with the United States in that arena. So I'm not discounting the issue of petrodollars, which is obvious. I mean, petrodollars is obviously in front of everyone to see because it's Venezuela. But there is also something else
But
which
it
is
is
synonymous
going to,
with
of
this
course,
area.
the
Yeah.
infrastructure that will be needed will take time and a lot of money. I want to bring that to you, Aparaajita. There's Shabri Subramanian asking, how will this impact oil trade and what is at stake for India? Of course, India in the past used to buy from Venezuela. It was a major supplier. And there were 2 oil fields that ONGC put money into, possibly has lost about at least between $500 million to $1 billion over there. And then in 2017, 2018, Mr. Trump put sanctions on Venezuela. That meant India zeroed out not just Iran, but also from Venezuela. What's going to happen next? What does it mean for India?
Suhasini, I think you sort of answered my question there, that because of the sanctions that have already been put and the fact that almost a decade ago, Venezuela just kind of stopped producing the kind of oil that we could depend on. India has reduced its dependency on Venezuelan oil a lot. The fact that we have the refining capabilities for the Venezuelan crude, which is not present in most of the world, does give us some leverage when it comes to that kind of heavy, dense crude. But we are not essentially buying oil from Venezuela the way we used to probably in Chavez's era. And we have focused on different regions. We have more energy partners now. We are sort of buying from Guyana at the moment, but not so substantially that if something happens to Guyana in the future, it would impact us in a detrimental way, specifically for India. However, if this was going to cause some ripples around the world, and there is an eventual increase in just oil prices around the world, well, that is something that is going to affect almost every country anyway. So nothing too sad for India, I think.
All right. Paola, do you want to weigh in on the oil question? Smriti writing, why does Mr. Trump even need Venezuelan oil when the US has enough shale?
I think has to do with when it was nationalized and the American companies, didn't receive the money that was supposed for that nationalization. And I think actually that of the oil is because of the problem of the oil prices inside in the United States. You know that the oil is a thermometer about the economic stability or not of the regular American citizen. So when an increase goes up and down, that affects the whole economy. And that here comes the protest. So I think it was kind of like a speech to make it see. We saw that on the market yesterday, on the financial market, stock market, how the stocks of the American oil companies increase just by this action that we don't know when, where, and how is going this to happen. So I think it is a part, and it's a part about the speculation that usually, the financial speculation that usually runs in the American society. And I think it was addressed to that, not because it is an oil problem in itself for the United States, okay?
Right. We're looking at those pictures, which really are very startling, of a foreign leader. Just hours before this, Mr. Maduro was welcoming a Chinese delegation, a high-powered delegation. He was chatting and joking with them. A few days before that, he had a rally in which he was dancing. He was mocking the US and saying, "Come and get me." And here you see these visuals of what seems to the rest of the world to be an extremely drastic measure, and by all accounts, a complete violation of international law, the use of force being used. That's the first part of the international law being used. So I want to now move to the kind of reactions we've seen coming. I'm going to come to you first, Paola, because they're in Argentina. Of course, Argentina has a much closer relationship with the US. We've seen in many parts kind of welcoming of the US's actions, but across South America, what has been the general reaction to these very startling events?
It has been against not the idea of supporting Maduro, but against of the action done by the United States. There was a joint communique between Brazil, Spain, Uruguay, Colombia, Mexico, saying that this affects international law. This is war in the countries in the region for someone who wants to seize resources or just directly intervene. So generally, it was an opposition, but to this, how the action? Maduro's regime has been a headache for most of the country of Latin America. A headache in case of human rights abuses, a headache because of drug dealing, a headache because of militia or paramilitary groups in the borders, because they were together with the FARC and the ELN. They have the local militias that affects and threatens the population. So it has been a problem. But this is not the way that the region wanted to do this transition. It should be through a dialogue or maybe from the population on. So the majority of the countries, even Boric, that is from Chile, that is from the left, he has been very critical to Maduro because everybody recognizes this situation, but everybody criticizes and rejects what the government of the United States has done, except, of course, Argentina, Panama, and some other places that are aligned with the United States in that sense.
Yeah, and apart from, of course, the fact that all US external interventions around the world have not ended very well for the countries in questions, and we're looking at some of those protests mostly in favor or certainly against the US action. We saw that massive rally in Caracas where they basically said, not in my country. Aparaajita, I don't know how much of the UN debate you followed, the UN Security Council. Obviously, a lot of it is just words. But we did see the real anger coming out on the violation of international law. How far do you think that legal argument is valid?
It's completely valid. I mean, this is a completely illegal action that the US has taken. The UNSC debating it and reacting to it is great when it comes to just the optics of it. Like you said, I don't think that there is any actionable recourse that the UNSC is going to take about this. Probably sometime in the future, if ICJ wants to take up this case, or Venezuela files a case in the ICJ, maybe there the legality can be discussed. But I don't see any punishment, so to say, for such an action by the US. And yes, it has been condemned, which is also important. There needs to be some sort of public acknowledgement that this is wrong, this is not the way to deal with international relations. And I appreciate that, but I don't see anything happening on the ground because of that condemnation.
Kallol, in fact, it's interesting. Of course, India is not in the Security Council at present, but it's interesting that India has not so far made the international law argument at all. I compare it to that previous case of 1982 when Panamanian President Manuel Noriega was kidnapped similarly and brought to the US. He was then held for trial, and then he was convicted. And at that time, again, India was a much weaker country, if you like, or its voice was not seen as much on the international stage. But India deplored the act. India condemned the act itself. What do you think explains New Delhi's decision to really keep its statement very bland, not even name the US, not talk about international law? It's something that the opposition in India has criticized the government for. But what do you think explains it?
Well, I think India's state instincts, as far as the international system is concerned, has undergone some sort of change in the recent past. What I want to draw your attention to is that prior to this particular intervention, I mean, we all understand intervention by the United States happens across the world, but then this sort of an intervention where the president of a sovereign country is actually abducted, handcuffed, and taken away it is basically sending a message to the whole world that this is now a rule. This is now possible in the domain of possibilities. Now, prior to that, we also saw what the United States was doing as far as bombing these boats that were coming from Latin America. And I think, I think two of these boats were subjected to very controversial double tap. Now, double tap is absolutely illegal. I mean, first of all, it's totally illegal to bomb a boat in the international waters, and then to ensure a double tapping on a boat is even more illegal. So
Which means
already,
to strike again to ensure that those who are even injured are killed.
Okay, yes, exactly. So the issue here is that when the double tapping was happening in the international waters, the maritime experts were already discussing in India that perhaps this is something that major powers across the world are going to observe. That if the United States can do this in the international waters, then probably Japan, China, India, probably even other countries that are not very friendly to the United States, Iran, for example, could also utilize that example to say that, look, this is possible now. This is now being done by the US. This is a norm in the international system. So we also would take these measures, quote unquote, preventive measures, and then get away with them. So what the United States does, because we heard that the China has deep pockets. What the United States does historically is that it sets the rules, sometimes to its own disadvantage. And what we are seeing, I mean, yeah, I think what India is doing is India is waiting and watching and observing which of these rules probably India too could copy, in sense that perhaps to its vital strategic backyard. This is something that this is my understanding that otherwise India's such long silence doesn't really make sense, unless of course India is also planning something in those lines in some uncertain future, because the United States, as I said, is the rule setter.
That's certainly an interesting takeaway. One I haven't heard being made so far, but the question of what exactly India is seeing from this is very important. In as much that you cannot compare Venezuela to other countries, as you said, it's a crisis in a different continent, but also compared to even Ukraine or Russia or Iran or Palestine or Israel. The number of Indians there, I think, are just about 50 to 60 or so. I do want to now come to all of you. This has happened right at the beginning of 2026. So the question on everybody's mind is about what is next, what we should take away. I'm going to just read out a number of these questions so you can see where our viewers are going, and then come to you. Are you asking, is this now a new way of neocolonialism? So is it a larger global, shift? We have Atira Madhvi saying, should Greenland be concerned about Trump? We have Carl saying, what is the future of the Indo-Pacific, as Trump has started to focus on the Western Hemisphere with what's called the Donroe Doctrine. Jaideep Gadavi is saying, how difficult will it now be for Europe to prosecute its case against Russia and build a consensus when, in fact, nobody has been able to stop the US from doing arguably something very similar in terms of transgressing an international boundary, of acting against the leadership there. So I'm just wondering if I could come to each of you, if you could give our viewers a sense of what are the takeaways from this event, what kind of impact are they going to have on the region, the world, and if you think that there are specific predictions you want to make for what's going to happen in the next few months. Certainly, I'm going to start with you, Paola.
Well, I think it's very difficult to predict what is going to happen. It is too soon. I don't know if it's a new colonialism. I think neocolonialism through economic means, through other means, have already existed, and the United States has been practicing directly, indirectly, until today. I think Greenland is a different situation. There is not a conflict. Invading, it was not going to be support, and we know that Greenland is not going to accept buying or whatever they present, and we know that will bring problems with the European Union. Regarding Europe will have now to take a stand and a foreign policy position that has not had in many years. Now that the United States has said, you have to manage your situation, the Europe now is facing a new way or a new European Union. The new European Union that has to play as an active role in international relations. Regarding the Indo-Pacific, I agree with what Kallol says. I think the countries in the region are looking at this to see what it can be done or what it can be used in the future, how to react to that. And I think we have to see, this is not a regime change. This is just presenting a position. And I doubted that they can change the regime in the short term. It's going to be very difficult because it's not only the heads of the government, it's not only the armed forces, not only the security forces, you have the civilian militias, you have the FARC, the ELF, you have the criminal groups. So it's not only those 5 persons that you can take them away and everything will disappear. So I see I mean, it's very difficult to see what is going on and how long it's going to take to do what the United States wants to do.
All right. Aparaajita, could I come to you? And if you can also give some of it in terms of what India is watching for and how this particular operation, this particular, if you like, invasion by the US will impact India as well.
I feel like when we look at the US at the moment, while Venezuela would not have too much of significance for us, but the fact that US is that willing to show its teeth and growl and willing to use military power whenever they want, without much thought towards what the international lobby says, how people would react, that is something that is going to bother us in the future. Indo-Pacific, of course, is going to be a theater, is been propped up as a theater for conflict, with China and the US continuously trying to gain more presence and spread more influence in that region. We need US in the Indo-Pacific. At the same time, we don't need them so aggressive. So it's going to be very difficult for India to find that balance where we have US on our side, but they aren't overpowering us in our policy and our economics and politics as well. What we pointed out earlier in the discussion, that US certainly has set a precedent, and this was more important because if you look at 2025 and almost 2024, people have stopped looking at US as a power that we used to think that US was the great power, and now it's all China, and the world was looking at China, and we were talking about China as the most, the biggest military and the most aggressive power that there is, and maybe we should not look at US too much. But today, I mean, in the past week or so, the Americans really have shown that we can't write them off, not that anybody really had. But their willingness to use military power and complete disregard of international opinion is something that India will have to look at and be concerned about.
Hearing Marco Rubio say, I don't really care what the United Nations says.
There's the kind of apathetic rhetoric that they have chosen is quite opposite to what a diplomat would use. So this is not how most countries behave, and that is concerning.
And certainly, in terms of the US being the kind of guardian of the post-World War II order and rules-based order, Kallol, any thoughts on where this could lead next?
Yeah, you really snatched the word before I could talk about it. Yeah, really, I think the year has started with the intervention in Venezuela, but we are going to see some very decisive moves as far as burying the international system that came after the World War II. Because it is quite obvious that the international system of the 1945 vintage cannot survive the kind of interventions the Americans are coming up with. It is quite obvious that the United States wants that world order to shift, but it does not want that new world order to be free of its central position. I'm not saying that new world order would also have American hegemony, but it's quite obvious that America wants to be in the leading position in the next world order too. And it can be in a leading position in the next world order too if it starts that world order. And I think that is what the Trump administration will do. I mean, I'm going back in time to the early 1990s. The decade started with the dissolution of the the USSR, but then it ended with the Gulf War. And the intervention in Iraq, it was moving towards that direction. And so I think it's starting this year, it's starting with Venezuela, but it's quite obvious that Americans have plans about how to go about navigating the coming few months, because first of all, they have to get the Russian and the Ukrainians to a negotiating table and get that Ukrainian conflict come to an end. So that is also one of the outcomes that I'm looking at, that as a possibility, that perhaps this is one of the first steps towards the dissolution of the stalemate in the European context, because this war has gone on for far too long. So this is just a kind of a prediction in the sense that what I expect this year to deliver. So this is going to be a lot of anarchy, a lot of war, and also some areas of peace where it is long awaited.
Sure. And, these remarks from our viewers are coming in. And, Jaideep Gadvi again saying this was a similar date, January 2nd or 3rd in 2020, when Trump struck the IRGC General Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad. So somehow, at the end of the year, or perhaps the beginning of the year, when it seems as if people have their eye off the ball, if you like, is when what Aparaajita was describing as a very well planned kind of operation. They were already ready, not just to pick up and abduct a president of a country, but to bring him back and have them in court within a day. And all the rest of that. So I want to ask you this question that has come from Ravi Upadhyay. I think he was sort of questioning what anyone really can do. So my question is, we have seen what the US has been able to do in terms of showing its military power over this last 1 year in particular, the kind of strikes Mr. Trump has made economically, which have affected every continent of the country, of the world, including some islands that didn't even have any populations. We saw tariffs being put on them. We've seen the US walk out of most international conventions, whether it's on climate change, whether it's on human rights, whether it's on culture, and all the rest of that. Ravi Upadhyay asked, do we have any say at all other than wasting our time on video discussions like this one? So I do want to actually ask, is 2026 going to be the year of pushback? Or are we really going to see more of these kind of actions from the US, which are unilateral, then, along with unilateral actions from other global powers? In other words, are we moving inexorably without any kind of pushback towards a world in which the rules don't exist? My final question. Let's start with you, Aparaajita.
I feel the pushback would only happen if we have some leverage. It would depend on the event and where our economy is during that time. While does that pushback actually serve our national interests, and can we afford to push back, whether it's the US or China or maybe Russia at some point of time? India is going to lead the BRICS in this coming year. And we know that BRICS has a China tilt there. So we might need US on our side more than we have in the past few years. We keep talking about strategic autonomy, but do we really have that autonomy given what our condition is at this moment? I think if we can find some leverage, we might be able to have some pushback. Otherwise, it would be keeping your head down and staying out of trouble.
That's interesting. Kallol, it is important that, that we're not just talking about India here, we're talking about the rest of the world. Do you see any kind of formulation, the BRICS, of course, coming together? But then there are also these questions, as Aparaajita said, will China do the same? Will China take a cue from the US's behavior and do as they do when it comes to Taiwan? Do you see any kind of a shift in the world?
Well, the reason that Donald Trump has gone ahead and done what he has done is because he, first of all, sold his agenda at the election level. and he has got the support of his voters. The MAGA, or whether you call it the American majority, that's something that they support the idea of make America great again. And whatever is necessary for making America great again, that will be done by Donald Trump. And that's the idea of the Trump presidency. I'm not sure whether in other democracies, be it in India or in Europe, or even in other countries, say in Southeast Asia, or even in Japan, there is such a voice emerging from the democratic process that will propel these countries to take such drastic measures to quote unquote make these countries great, or other equivalent in greatness to the United States. Because the US president is basically bolstered by his election time promise. And I'm not sure whether that can be compared with, say, when it comes to China, which is obviously a strategic machine that will decide on its own depending on the single party system that it has. I mean, the two political systems and the outcomes of these two political systems, I'm not sure whether these two can be compared easily, because these two systems will behave differently. But in the United States, in case of the US, I think it's very clear that Trump is drawing his legitimacy, especially the legitimacy of these sort of interventions, from his public support base, which is very rare to find in a democratic setup anywhere in the world.
Certainly. And of course, the US too has these midterm elections later this year in 2026. So we'll see how that will work. The US is also the host of the G20. Will all those countries come together, particularly as one of the strikes is the US telling South Africa that they are not invited to the G20 here. Paola, you're getting a sense of the kind of commentary here in India. How do you see the next year in terms of a formulation that could perhaps counter some of these unilateral moves? We did see some things like, the Five Eyes stopping their intelligence cooperation, for example, on Latin America, because telling the US that when we give you information or share intelligence, you're just using them to conduct these strikes. But do you see any more of a pushback in South America in particular?
No, I don't think so, because the countries do not have the power. And except of Brazil, we don't have military power to resist that. But I think that Brazil, through the BRICS and through other international organism, it can lead to this rejection and action that can give the United States a message. As Aparaajita said, it would depend on the topic and on the event. It's not the same economic, trade, or commercial issues than we're talking about military ones. Military ones, the region is not able to resist that. Not more than to say that is incorrect, or to protest, or to present issues. We will have to say today is the meeting of the Organization of American States, the extraordinary meeting in about 2 hours and a half. And there we will say what is going on there and what is stated out of there. But more than that, I don't think so. I think military speaking, the United States has always done whatever they wanted. Regardless international law, it's not the first time. Has been many times in history that they had done whatever they want, or whatever they think they need to be done for the United States. So I don't think that would change. We were expecting that our continent would not be the place to do that, because of all these decades that it has been peaceful and we have been resolving our problems. And that's why I think that is what alerts the presidents and the political elite in the region. He can do it again, because it's easy to do it in this part of the world.
I think what's clear to all of us from everything our panelists have said this evening is that this operation that may have taken a few hours in Caracas, in Venezuela, has sent ripples around the world, and it could have a lasting impact on not just a country or a region or a continent or a hemisphere, but in fact on the global order itself and how it sees itself rearranging in the next year or so. But I'd like to thank all of you for joining us, Paola Baroni, Aparaajita Pandey, and Kallol Bhattacherjee. Thank you for joining us at The Hindu, and to our viewers and our readers sending in all these questions. We hope we could get to as many of them as possible. But what is very clear is that there's a huge interest in this issue over here. So we hope to come back to you again with much more. From the team here, thanks so much for watching.
Thank you.